Welcome to The World Meets in Wood Buffalo. We are going to talk about drinking in different cultures, and today we have Amy McGowan.
Yes, that's correct.
And she actually had the privilege of being born in a different place. She was born in Malaysia and she lived there for 10 years. And so we're going to hear some interesting stories about drinking in Malaysia as well as vis-a-vis drinking in Canada. And we also have Lisa Michaud.
Yeah.
And so we are going to hear about the mainstream Canadian culture of drinking as well as versus, the East Coast drinking culture. And I'm from India, so I'm going to tell you something about how we drink in our country as a culture, and that's about it. So welcome to our show today, and it's really exciting to have you both here.
Absolutely.
So what would you say about the Malaysian drinking culture? How does it look?
That's a really interesting question, and I can definitely only answer it from the perspective of an expat living in Malaysia, which is a really interesting perspective in itself. But the drinking culture in Malaysia does really vary like any country, so we have quite a big spread. You've got some folks who definitely don't drink at all, so either based on their religious beliefs or their lifestyles, choose not to consume any alcohol, so it's pretty easy there. And then you definitely have parts of the crowd that are a little more rambunctious, I guess you could say, and there's definitely a party scene as there is in every country, I suppose.
What about the Canadian culture? Like, what do you think is different?
Well, still to this day, doesn't matter how old you are, you can't get beer in a gas station in Canada. And in Canada, I feel like compared to some other cultures in different places I've traveled, I feel like generally we're a lot more strict about alcohol, about who can buy it, and what you can buy, and where you can buy it, and even what times of day you can buy it. So I would say in general for Canadians, it's a pretty exciting thing when you're finally able to buy your first beer or your first bottle of wine or your first cocktail at a restaurant. Like, that's something that Canadians really look forward to, whether it's your 18th birthday in Alberta, your 19th birthday in other parts of Canada. It's quite an exciting time to get to that point.
Very interesting. Do you have something like a tradition where people are I heard this from a Newfoundlander actually, that they're screeched into or something like that.
Yes.
So maybe you can explain something about that.
So I'm actually from the West Coast, but I've heard about being screeched in as well. And I think being in Fort McMurray, we're quite exposed to Newfoundlanders as well and get to learn a little bit about their culture, which is cool. I think actually the Newfie Club in town does this as well. So being screeched in involves drinking screech, which is a very strong alcohol, and I wasn't the biggest fan of it when I tried it, but I'm sure some people have a taste for it. And then you have to actually kiss a codfish afterwards, or like a really ugly fish if you can't find a cod. So the Newfoundlanders Club actually has one that's frozen in in the freezer for those special moments when on a Friday or Saturday night you feel like treating someone to being screeched in.
Actually, in our culture, it's something we now do. Like, it's becoming more, society's becoming more westernized, and so people do those things. And when you have like big parties, you have a champagne right in front, and you like do all the stuff that like, shake it up, and then you blow the top off and all that. And for wedding celebrations, especially for Christian wedding celebrations, we have the toast where you raise a cup of red wine and have a cake along with it, and then you raise it, and then everybody drinks it at one go, and that's how you bless the couple and all that stuff. And so that's now popular. But like traditionally, like Indian culture has a few things that they do as a part of traditional festivities for different festivals. And so there is this alcohol that's prepared from a flour, and it's really strong. It's 70% alcohol.
Oh, wow.
And people make sweets with that alcohol, and they eat it, and they get totally drunk. And then like you lose all your inhibitions to play with color. So that's the day when people play with color. And
cool.
so they throw color and water at everybody they meet on the streets, and there's no taboo on whom you can color on that day. So it's just you go wild and you can go crazy. So some people who are quite inhibited at doing things like that, they just have that, and then they are just so easy, like they just do it. Do you miss anything living here in Fort McMurray?
Absolutely, yeah. And Malaysia in particular, not to breach too far off topic, but the food is something that I really miss. And the drinks are different as well. the Canadian drinking menu is relatively different than what you can find overseas for sure. There's a lot of pretty tasty concoctions that you just can't get here.
What are those? Can you name a few?
Ooh, that might be tricky.
Are there some different fruits that that the cocktails would have maybe in Malaysia?
Something like, for example, when we think of a mojito, it's usually the mint drink, right? But a lychee mojito, if you have a lychee fruit, which I think is, so, but you can't really get a lychee mojito here. So just things like that, or just different flavors that are brought in. Beers, no, but they're just generally brewed more in the local, like Southeast Asian area. So you just get different brands, I guess, and they taste different. Local alcohol. But you can buy some here. So Tiger beer, for example, is one that's really popular in Southeast Asia, and you can get that here. So sometimes we'll pick that up for a little taste at home. But yeah.
Very interesting. Is there something that probably from the western part of Canada that you don't get here, or something that you really miss about?
I actually miss the wines. I find in BC the wines are really excellent. There's the Okanagan wine region, as well as Vancouver Island itself is really starting to emerge as a wine making area. And I find you cannot get the same wines here. There's a few of the bigger winemakers that you can buy, like the Mission Hill, the Quails Gate. But some of those smaller family-owned businesses where you can walk in and they'll let you taste anything you want, and you go home with a few bottles for the weekend.
It's so funny because, when I lived in Iran, we had similar experiences. We'll talk about that when we come back. Welcome back to The World Meets in Wood Buffalo. We're talking about the drinking cultures in different countries, and I was talking about how I lived in Iran for 4 years, and what I saw there was quite interesting. Mostly it's an Islamic republic, and because of that, drinking is really frowned upon. So like most Muslim people are not allowed to drink. So you would think that probably nobody really makes wine or anything there, but seriously, if you know, Shiraz is a place in Iran.
I did not know that. That is so... I drink a lot of Shiraz. I guess I should know that.
We should go there.
And you get absolutely delicious Shiraz wine there, which people make in their own homes. They have these big rubber boots they wear, and they just stomp on these grapes, and they make it in their houses. And it's so amazing, the process of actually watching that and really seeing how they do it. And actually drinking that wine is so delicious, and it's only done by Zoroastrian people. It's allowed for them, the Zoroastrian people and the indigenous Christian people. It's not allowed for the Muslim people. So if the Muslim people have to consume, they have to either go to a clandestine party with closed doors, all black curtains, nobody sees it, and they have a party. And like many times, even women are not allowed to take off their they have the hijab that they wear, and so even I had to wear it when I lived there. So you have to take off all your clothes when you get into some friend's house, and then you dance, and it's so fun to watch the women, drunk and dancing this Persian dance and everything. I thoroughly enjoyed my time in Iran, and Persian wine was one of those things which really made it great. So that's something that I wanted to bring. Is there something that you saw in some other culture that you have visited, or is there some other thing that you wanted to bring?
In terms of drinking, one thing I do find interesting, though, is the preference for beverage. So even when Lisa started talking about the wines there, just picking up the culture's preference for drinking mostly wine or mostly beer or spirits, and a lot of it kind of depends on the part of the world that you happen to be in, or what people consume. Yeah, which is pretty interesting to observe. I think. Well, we're probably pretty good spread in Canada, I think, across the board, maybe all of them. But I know when I lived in Malaysia, it was beer and spirits were much, much more common. So wine you could definitely buy at all the grocery stores, but it wasn't, the first choice unless you're at a nicer restaurant or something like that for most folks. So beer was kind of the staple of the
And actually, even in India, you find that it's mostly heavy drinks like brandy or whiskey or rum that people consume at big parties and events. And it's mostly the women who drink wine, and very elite gatherings where there's only business people or something like that, then you have wines. So it's very interesting how there's a status difference to these drinks as well. So the other thing I heard about was that there was America was dry for some time, and Canada wasn't, so it was allowed for Canada to still produce beers, and so people would go from the East Coast in boats and deliver to America.
Oh, okay.
So there was this little bootlegging culture that was there. So do you know anything about, is there something different about the Croatian drinking culture?
I think it's probably similar to Malaysian in that it's very very easy to get alcohol. It's also very common in Croatia to drink. Like, my family would think nothing of giving a beer to a 5-year-old, or to having several drinks on a school night or a work night. Like, I remember going there when I was 12, and I don't remember anybody ever saying, "No, I won't have that drink because I have to work tomorrow." So it was very different.
So it's very common to do that there.
Very common, very relaxed. Also doesn't seem to be abused as much as I notice in Canada. It's not like this
Intangible if it's restricted until a certain age, and then
just grow up trying, a little bit of beer, or a little bit of wine, or a little bit of brandy is very common too. A lot of my family makes their own brandy. So you're not waiting till you're 18 and then go crazy. It's just sort of, you're used to it and you...
Yeah, I've actually, when I lived in Iran, there was this friend of mine who was French, and her husband used to work for some car manufacturer, French car manufacturer. And so when she invited us to her house for a party, for a Christmas party, it was just a common drink, and everybody was just, along with their food, they were having either white or red wine. So depending on whether they took chicken or beef,
yeah.
They just had, so if they took chicken, they would have white wine, and if they took beef, they would have red wine. And I was like, oh, wow, this is interesting. And it's so different. Even the wine flutes that you have,
the different shapes of glasses for the different,
So it was amazing. I really found that very interesting. And it's an intricate part of the French culture to drink.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know that in Quebec, drinking is very fine drinking, right?
Yes.
So they prefer wines more than beer and other things, which, in the East Coast, it's very much beer, and in other parts...
and screech.
And also the Irish coffee. It's very common here.
Yes.
To have that. So I'm really fond of Irish coffee. I really enjoy it. I love it. So
anything along those lines, Spanish coffee, Irish coffee. Every time we've been actually even traveling down to South America, it's very common to have kind of a nightcap, but a warm nightcap. So not what we would think is like a small brandy or something, but a coffee or a hot mocha or something with obviously alcohol in it. But it's a really common part of the culture to have a nightcap, I guess, in that way.
And just being naughty, I remember my mom, she would, generally moms don't drink, right? So then she has
not true.
she really, in my country, moms don't drink, right? So she doesn't want to pass on a culture where she was caught drinking, right? So she would have this little brandy bottle in her cupboard, and when she got really a bad cold and a sore throat and everything, she would take an egg, like a raw egg. She would put brandy in it, and then she would what else did she put in? I think milk, and she would just gulp it down like that. And I used to tell her, "What are you drinking?" And then she would say, "Oh, that's medicine, So I just remembered, and my mom, if she's going to see this, she's going to be very embarrassed.
Tell your mom that's a very common way that most Canadian mothers cope every day. A little glass of wine.
So I really want to thank you both for being part of our show.
Thanks for having us.
We are going to close the show today. I hope all of you learned enough about drinking in different cultures, and thank you very much for being part of The World Meets in Wood Buffalo.